The alien's silent desperation. Zaren's vision blurred as she stumbled through the barren wasteland of a desolate human colony. The sky above was a dull gray with storms swirling on the horizon. Her breathing was labored, each step a painful reminder of the broken implants lodged in her spine. Once they had been her greatest strength, advanced alien technology designed to amplify her abilities and connect her to her people. Now they were her curse. Sparks of pain shot through her nerves, forcing her to clutch a nearby piece of wreckage to steady herself. The colony had been abandoned for years, its human inhabitants driven away by war. Buildings stood like skeletons, hollow and lifeless. Zaren's species had played a part in that war, and she had once believed it was for the greater good. But now, as a pariah cast out by her own kind, she was unsure of everything except her will to survive. Her body gave out and she crumpled to the ground, dust rising around her. "No," she muttered, her voice hoarse. "Not like this." Her hands trembled as she reached for a beacon embedded in her wrist, but it was useless. The implant's malfunction had isolated her completely. Zaren's mind drifted as she lay there, memories flashing before her eyes. She had stood tall among her people, a defender of their empire. But questioning the orders of the High Command had sealed her fate, stripped of her rank, exiled, and sent to die on a forgotten world. Now, her enemies were her only hope. As the first drops of acidic rain began to fall, Zaren forced her head to turn. In the distance, she spotted a faint light flickering from one of the old buildings. Her heart quickened. Could there still be someone here? A survivor? A human? The thought both terrified and motivated her. Her people had fought humans for decades, portraying them as barbaric, impulsive, and weak. But as much as Zaren had once believed in her empire's superiority, she had heard whispers of humanity's stubbornness, their refusal to bow even in the face of destruction. The light grew brighter as Zaren crawled forward, her limbs barely responding. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind refused to quit. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached the entrance of the building, its walls rusted and covered in faded human graffiti. Inside, the light was stronger, a warm glow emanating from what looked like a workshop. Tools hung neatly on the walls, and pieces of machinery lay scattered across a cluttered table. Then she heard it, footsteps. Zaren's heart raced as a shadow moved in the doorway. A figure appeared, a human man, tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden by a hood. His hands held a strange tool, which he sat down slowly as he noticed her. For a moment, neither moved. The human's eyes narrowed, scanning her alien form with suspicion. Zaren knew what he saw, her shimmering silver skin marred by scars, her glowing eyes dimmed with exhaustion, and the faint hum of her damaged implants. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice low and steady. Zaren opened her mouth to respond, but her strength failed her. Her body slumped forward, and darkness began to creep into her vision. "Wait," the man said, rushing forward. He caught her before she hit the ground, his hands surprisingly gentle. Zaren's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, locking onto his. "Please, help," she managed to say before her consciousness faded completely. The human mechanic's dilemma. Daniel stared at the alien woman in his arms, his mind racing. He hadn't seen one of her kind in years, not since the war ended. She was different from the ones he remembered, fragile, broken, desperate. Yet something about her plea struck a chord deep within him. He carried her into the workshop, laying her on an old cot. As he examined her, his eyes caught the faint sparks coming from her back. The implants were unlike anything he had ever seen, advanced and intricate, but clearly failing. "This is trouble," he muttered to himself. His instincts told him to leave her there, to let her problems stay hers. Humans and aliens had no reason to trust each other, not after everything that had happened. But as he looked at her pained expression, a memory surfaced, his brother lying injured on a battlefield, begging for someone to help him. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. Guess I don't have much of a choice. He picked up a toolkit and began inspecting the implants. Each spark was a reminder of how fragile the situation was, and as he worked, a single thought crossed his mind: what kind of mess had he just gotten himself into? The sound of rain striking the metal roof echoed through the small workshop as Daniel sat at his cluttered workbench, staring at the unconscious alien woman on the cot. The faint glow of her implants flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the walls. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "What am I doing?" he muttered under his breath. Helping her wasn't just risky, it was reckless. Daniel had spent the last 5 years avoiding trouble, living off the grid in this forgotten colony. Humans and aliens alike had written this place off, which was exactly why he had chosen it. But now, trouble had literally fallen at his doorstep. He glanced at her again, taking in the strange silvery patterns etched into her skin like veins made of liquid metal. Her kind had been the face of the enemy during the war, their advanced technology cutting through human forces like paper. Daniel had lost more than his fair share to them: friends, comrades, and his brother Ben. And yet, here she was, broken and vulnerable, with no one else to save her. As if sensing his hesitation, the implant on her back sparked violently, sending a sharp jolt through her body. She groaned softly in her sleep, her fingers twitching. "Damn it," Daniel muttered, standing up. He didn't need to be a doctor to know she wouldn't last long without help. The implants were failing catastrophically, and whatever was inside her system was causing damage faster than her body could repair it. He picked up his toolkit and crouched beside her. His hands hesitated over the glowing device. It was unlike anything he'd worked on before, a fusion of biotechnology and machinery that seemed to hum with life. "All right," he said to himself. "Let's see what you're made of." As he pried open the outer casing of the implant, his workshop filled with a faint melodic hum. The inner workings of the device were mesmerizing, delicate filaments of energy pulsated like tiny rivers, threading through crystalline circuits. It was beautiful and utterly alien. But as Daniel studied the device, he noticed something odd. There were layers upon layers of safeguards built into the design, almost as if the implant wasn't just meant to enhance the alien, it was meant to control her. "What the hell?" he whispered. Before he could process the implications, a faint voice interrupted him. You shouldn't touch that." Daniel froze. He looked up to see the alien woman's glowing eyes half open, watching him through the haze of pain. "You're awake," he said, startled. "I wasn't sure you'd make it." Her lips twitched in what might have been a weak smile. "You have steady hands for a human." "Thanks, I guess," he replied, frowning. "What are these implants?" "They're tearing you apart." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze flickered to the exposed circuits in his hands, then back to his face. They were a gift. Now they're a leash. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. "A leash? What do you mean?" The alien woman tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, collapsing back onto the cot. "They keep us loyal, keep us in line. Without them." Her voice trailed off, her breathing shallow. Daniel's jaw tightened. He didn't know what kind of society would do this to its own people, but it was clear she wasn't just some soldier or scout. She was running from something, or someone. And now she was his problem. "Listen," Daniel said, setting down his tools. "I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I'm not exactly the heroic rescue type. You're better off somewhere else." The alien's eyes locked onto his, their glow intensifying. "If you leave me, I'll die." Her words hung in the air like a challenge. Daniel sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Fine. I'll help you fix this, whatever it is. But once you're up and running, you're out of here. Got it?" She nodded faintly, her expression unreadable. "Understood." As Daniel turned back to the implant, a small part of him wondered why he hadn't just walked away. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, something haunted, desperate, and all too familiar. Or maybe it was because, deep down, he still believed in fixing things, no matter how broken they seemed. A fragile alliance. The low hum of the repaired circuits filled the workshop as Daniel carefully reassembled the alien woman's implant. Every twist of a wire and adjustment of a crystalline node felt like defusing a bomb. One wrong move and the fragile balance might collapse again. Zarin lay on the cot, her breathing steadier now, though her luminous eyes tracked Daniel's every move. She was too weak to resist but not too weak to observe. Her gaze was sharp, calculating, as though she were assessing more than just his mechanical skills. "You don't trust me," Daniel said without looking up, his voice breaking the silence, steady but laced with a hint of irritation. "Should I?" Zarin replied, her tone soft but edged with caution. Daniel snorted. "Fair point. But I'm not the one who's falling apart here." Her lips curled into what might have been a smirk. "And yet you're helping me." "Why?" Daniel hesitated, his fingers pausing mid-adjustment. He didn't have a simple answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the gnawing loneliness that had driven him to this backwater colony in the first place. Or maybe it was the curiosity of seeing something, someone, so advanced and yet so utterly vulnerable. "I guess I like fixing broken things," he muttered, returning to the implant. Zarin studied him silently for a moment. "Even if they were once your enemy?" "That depends," Daniel said, tightening a bolt. "Are you still my enemy?" Her response was slow, deliberate. "Not today." The room fell silent again, save for the occasional spark from the tools. But the quiet wasn't comfortable, it was heavy, layered with unspoken questions neither of them dared to voice. Finally, Daniel leaned back and wiped his hands on a rag. "That should stabilize you for now," he said, gesturing to her implant. "But it's not a permanent fix. I'm guessing you know more about this tech than I do." Zarin nodded weakly. "Enough to know how dangerous it is." "You're better than I expected, for someone untrained." Daniel arched an eyebrow, offended. "Untrained? I was an engineer before your people turned my life into rubble. Fixing things is what I do. Or used to, anyway." Her expression softened, just slightly. "Then you understand why this is more than just broken technology. It's a prison." Daniel leaned against the edge of the workbench, crossing his arms. "You keep saying that. Prison. Leash. What's the story here? Why were you left to die out here while your people moved on?" Zarin hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, Daniel thought she wouldn't answer. Then, with a deep breath, she began. "I questioned the Empire," she said, her voice quieter now. "The implants, they're not just tools. They're control mechanisms. Every thought, every decision, monitored. And if you resist, they punish you." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Punish? How?" Her glowing eyes met his, and he saw a flicker of pain there. "Imagine your own body turning against you. Your nerves on fire, your muscles frozen. That's what they do. And when I refused to follow their orders, they didn't just exile me. They turned my implants against me so even survival would be torture." Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "That's barbaric." "It's effective," Zarin said bitterly. "They don't need loyalty when they can enforce obedience." The room fell silent again, the weight of her words pressing down on them both. Daniel stared at her, trying to reconcile this story with the image he'd grown up with, the image of her people as invincible conquerors. "So," he said finally, "you're telling me you're not here to finish what the war started?" Zarin gave a dry, humorless laugh. "If I were, would I be lying here hoping for a human's mercy?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a corner of the workshop and grabbed a canteen of water. He handed it to her without a word. Zarin accepted it cautiously, her fingers brushing his as she took it. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice softer now. Don't thank me yet, Daniel said. We've got bigger problems. Zarin tilted her head, confused. What do you mean? Daniel nodded toward a monitor on the far wall, where a small blinking light indicated an incoming signal. Your implants weren't just killing you, Daniel said grimly. They've been broadcasting. Her eyes widened in alarm. Broadcasting? To who? Don't know, Daniel said, grabbing a wrench and checking the locks on the workshop doors. But if they're coming, we don't have much time to figure it out. The hidden truth. The faint glow of the workshop's emergency lights cast long shadows across the walls as Daniel worked tirelessly at his console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The alien woman, Zarin, sat propped against the cot, her breathing steadier now, but her gaze fixed on him. Her luminous eyes, though tired, still carried a glint of suspicion in something else. Any luck? Zarin asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Daniel didn't look up. Luck's got nothing to do with it. Your implants' logs are encrypted so tightly I'm surprised they don't self-destruct the second I touch them. Zarin shifted uncomfortably. They're not meant to be tampered with. Not by anyone. Yeah, well, Daniel muttered, I've always had a thing for breaking rules. With a soft click, the screen lit up with rows of alien script. Daniel leaned back, exhaling sharply. Got it. Your implants' memory logs. Let's see what you've been hiding. Zarin stiffened. Wait, but it was too late. The screen filled with fragmented images and recordings, holographic projections of Zarin's past. Daniel froze as he watched her standing in a massive chamber of gleaming steel, surrounded by rows of her kind. The implants on their spines pulsed in perfect synchronization, their movements almost robotic. A deep, commanding voice boomed from the recording, dissent will not be tolerated. The Empire thrives on unity, and unity requires obedience. Those who question the high command will face correction. Zarin stood defiantly in the center of the room, her head held high. Obedience is not unity, she said, her voice clear and strong. It's fear. And fear is not the foundation of an empire, it's its weakness. The hologram froze as Zarin reached out weakly, her voice trembling. Turn it off. Daniel ignored her. So you were some kind of rebel? I wasn't trying to be, Zarin said, her gaze dropping to the floor. I believed in the Empire once. I believed in what we were supposed to stand for. But when I saw what they were doing, what they were making us become, I couldn't stay silent. Daniel studied her for a moment, then turned back to the console. More images flashed on the screen, Zarin being dragged from the chamber by two guards, her implant sparking as she screamed in pain, a ship departing a massive orbital station, heading for exile. Then the screen went dark. That's why they sent you here, Daniel said, his voice quieter now. Not because you were dangerous. Because you made them look weak. Zarin nodded slowly. They don't care about dissenters. They care about control. And when someone breaks that control, they make an example of them. Daniel leaned against the console, crossing his arms. So what's the plan, then? You're not exactly in fighting shape, and if your implant's been broadcasting like I think it has, they know you're alive. They'll come for you. I didn't expect to survive this long, Zarin admitted. But now. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. Now I think I might have a chance. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Chance for what? To fight back, she said, her voice firm. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's still under their control. Daniel shook his head. You're talking about taking on an empire with what? My wrench and some scrap metal? Zarin managed a faint smile. You'd be surprised what a human and a rebel can do when they work together. Before Daniel could respond, the workshop's proximity alarm blared, a shrill sound that made his heart skip. He spun toward the monitor, where a red warning light flashed ominously. "They found us," he said grimly. Zaren's expression hardened, and she began to push herself upright, wincing as her muscles protested. "Then we better be ready." Daniel grabbed a weapon from the corner of the room, a cobbled-together plasma rifle he'd sworn never to use. "I don't know what kind of mess I've gotten into," he said, glancing at her. "But I hope you're worth it." Zaren locked eyes with him, her determination unwavering. "I am." As the sound of approaching ships roared in the distance, Daniel and Zaren prepared for the fight of their lives, both knowing that the truth they had uncovered was only the beginning. A dangerous visitor. The sound of boots crunching on gravel echoed through the silent ruins of the abandoned colony. Zaren tensed, her glowing eyes narrowing as she glanced toward the sealed workshop door. The air felt heavier, charged with the promise of conflict. "They're here," she murmured. Daniel tightened his grip on the makeshift plasma rifle, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't seen another living soul in months, let alone someone, or something, actively hunting him. "What do they want?" Daniel asked, his voice low. "They want me," Zaren said, her tone sharp. "Dead or alive?" Daniel scoffed. "That's comforting." A deep, mechanical voice boomed from outside. "Zaren, former lieutenant of the Empire. Surrender yourself now. Resistance is futile." Zaren's jaw clenched, and she instinctively reached for the dagger at her hip, a weapon she no longer had. "It's a bounty hunter," she said bitterly. "They send them for traitors like me." Daniel peeked through a small crack in the window. What he saw made his stomach drop. The bounty hunter wasn't just any alien, it was a towering figure encased in black armor that shimmered like liquid metal. Its glowing red eyes scanned the area, and a massive energy blade rested in its hand. "That thing's a walking tank," Daniel muttered. "And after me," Zaren said. "No kidding." The bounty hunter's voice came again, colder this time. "Do not test my patience. Step outside, or I will breach the structure and ensure your suffering is prolonged." Daniel turned to Zaren, his voice a hiss. "What's the plan? You're the expert on dealing with these things." "I usually don't survive long enough to make plans," she admitted. "Fantastic," Daniel said sarcastically. The workshop trembled as the bounty hunter raised its blade and drove it into the ground. The shock wave sent tools clattering off the workbench and cracked the walls. "We don't have time to argue," Zaren said. She pushed herself to her feet, wincing as her still-healing implants sparked faintly. "Can you trust me?" Daniel blinked. "Trust you? You're the reason this thing's here." "I didn't ask for your help," Zaren shot back. "But you gave it anyway. And now, if you want to survive, we need to work together." Before Daniel could respond, the workshop door groaned under the pressure of the bounty hunter's blade. The metal bent inward, glowing red-hot at the edges. "Fine," Daniel said, shoving a small device into her hands. "You want to work together? Use this." Zaren looked down at the device, a compact explosive rigged from spare parts. "Crude," she said, a faint smirk on her lips. "But it'll do." Daniel grabbed a second device from the workbench, a portable EMP generator. "When this goes off, it'll short out their systems for a few seconds. That's all the time you'll get." Zaren nodded, her expression serious. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," Daniel said, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. The door gave another shriek as it buckled further, and Daniel activated the EMP. A pulse of blue energy surged outward, and the bounty hunter's glowing red eyes flickered. "Now!" Daniel shouted. Zaren moved with a speed that belied her injuries, darting out of the workshop and hurling the explosive directly at the bounty hunter's chest. The device detonated in a flash of light and fire, sending the armored figure stumbling backward. But it wasn't enough. The bounty hunter reared, its armor scorched but intact. It raised its blade, its movements more sluggish now but no less deadly. Any other bright ideas? Zarin called, dodging a swing of the blade. Daniel scrambled for another weapon, his mind racing. Keep it busy. That's the plan. Zarin shouted back, rolling behind a piece of debris as the blade carved a molten scar into the ground. As the bounty hunter focused on Zarin, Daniel managed to climb onto a ledge above it. He aimed his plasma rifle, took a deep breath, and fired directly at the exposed joint where its armor met its neck. The shot hit true. Sparks erupted from the bounty hunter's neck, and it let out a guttural growl, staggering forward. Zarin didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed a shard of jagged metal from the ground and drove it into the damaged joint, twisting it with all her strength. The bounty hunter let out one final, furious roar before collapsing in a heap of smoking armor. Breathing heavily, Zarin stepped back, her silver skin streaked with dirt and blood. "Not bad," she said, glancing up at Daniel. "Not bad," Daniel replied, sliding down from the ledge. "That was a miracle." Zarin smirked faintly. "You're lucky I'm here, human." Daniel shook his head, a small grin forming despite himself. "Yeah. Lucky me." But as they stood over the defeated bounty hunter, the glow of Zarin's implants began to intensify. "They know," she said, her voice grim. "The Empire knows where I am now." Daniel's grin faded. "Then we better get moving. This isn't over." The final repairs. The silence in the workshop was deafening after the battle. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the bounty hunter's armor, its once menacing glow reduced to a dull flicker. Zarin leaned heavily against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The glow of her implants was erratic, and faint sparks flickered across her back like tiny lightning storms. Daniel paced the room, his mind racing. He couldn't stop replaying the moment when Zarin's implants had surged, the sudden flare of light that signaled more than just damage. It was a beacon, a silent cry that would undoubtedly bring the Empire's forces straight to them. "We don't have time for this," Daniel muttered, grabbing a toolbox and slamming it onto the workbench. Zarin turned her head slowly, her eyes glowing faintly. "Time for what?" "Fixing you," Daniel said, already sorting through tools and components. "You said these implants are a leash. Then let's cut it." Zarin's expression was a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "You think you can override Imperial tech? It's not a wrench and duct tape situation." Daniel shot a sharp look. "It's not the first time I've had to deal with over-engineered garbage. The difference is this time I care about who I'm fixing." The words hung in the air for a moment before Zarin gave a faint nod. "Do what you have to." Daniel pulled up a chair and rolled her forward slightly to access the damaged implants. The core of the device was a labyrinth of alien circuitry and organic filaments, pulsating like a living organism. Every movement he made felt like surgery on something alive. "You said these implants were meant to control you," Daniel said, his voice steady as he worked. "How do they do it?" "They monitor everything," Zarin replied, her tone quieter now. "Thoughts, emotions, even loyalty. If you stray too far from their parameters, they punish you." Daniel frowned. "And they've been punishing you ever since you turned against them?" Zarin gave a bitter laugh. "Every second." Daniel shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Unbelievable. They built this tech to crush dissent. No wonder they're so afraid of you." "I wasn't special," Zarin said, her voice soft. "I just asked questions. But in the Empire, questions are more dangerous than weapons." Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her voice. "Well, you're not in the Empire anymore. And if I have anything to say about it, you never will be again." The glow of her implants began to pulse more rapidly as Daniel worked, his fingers deftly rewiring connections and bypassing corrupted circuits. But as he delved deeper, he found something unexpected, a hidden core within the implant, locked away behind layers of encryption. What's this? Daniel asked, frowning. Zaren's eyes widened slightly. The fail-safe. Fail-safe? Daniel repeated, his stomach sinking. They install it in all of us, Zaren explained, her voice trembling. If we go rogue, they can activate it remotely. It's a kill switch. Daniel froze for a moment, his mind racing. He had seen his share of horrifying tech in the war, but this was something else. And it's active? Zaren nodded. Always. Daniel let out a sharp breath. Great. No pressure, then. He leaned in closer, studying the failsafe. It was protected by layers of firewalls and self-destruct protocols. If he made one wrong move, the implant would detonate, taking Zaren with it. You don't have to do this, Zaren said quietly. I've lived with this thing for so long. Maybe it's better to stop fighting it. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he shook his head. No. You didn't come all this way, survive all of this, just to give up now. If they put this thing in you, then I'll take it out. End of story. For the first time, Zaren's expression softened, her usual sharpness giving way to something more vulnerable. Why do you care so much? Daniel paused, his hands hovering over the console. He didn't look at her as he spoke. Because I know what it's like to lose everything. And I'm tired of standing by while people suffer. He refocused on the task at hand, his fingers moving with precision, bypassing traps and defusing failsafes one by one. Every second felt like an eternity, the weight of Zaren's life resting in his hands. Finally, with a soft click, the failsafe core detached. Daniel held it up, staring at the small, pulsing device. It's out, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Zaren exhaled shakily, the tension in her body visibly easing. You did it. Daniel set the core on the workbench, his hands shaking slightly. Yeah. I did. But we're not out of the woods yet. If they know I've tampered with this thing, they'll send everything they've got. Zaren nodded, her expression resolute. Then we'll be ready. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not an enemy or a burden but an ally. Yeah, he said, his voice steady. We will. But as the distant hum of approaching ships filled the air, both of them knew the real fight was just beginning. Hope renewed. The distant hum of engines grew louder, echoing through the ruins of the abandoned colony. Zaren stood by the window of the workshop, her glowing eyes fixed on the dark sky where the faint outlines of Imperial ships began to appear. They're here, she said, her voice calm but edged with resolve. Daniel tightened the strap on his makeshift armor and slung the plasma rifle over his shoulder. His fingers hovered over the control panel of the portable EMP generator he had rigged to the workshop's defenses. Let them come, he said, his voice steady despite the weight of what was about to happen. We're ready. Zaren glanced at him, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. I never thought I'd see the day a human stood shoulder to shoulder with me against the Empire. Daniel grinned back, though his expression carried a hint of grim determination. Guess I'm full of surprises. As the first ship descended, its landing gear crushing the brittle remains of an old human outpost, Zaren's implants pulsed faintly. But this time, they didn't flicker in pain or malfunction. Daniel's work had turned her implants into something new, something free. You sure you're up for this? Daniel asked, his voice quieter now. Zaren nodded, her gaze hardening. I've been waiting for this moment for longer than you can imagine. The workshop doors burst open as a squad of Imperial enforcers marched in, their armor gleaming under the dim light. The leader stepped forward, his voice amplified by his helmet speakers. Zaren, traitor to the Empire. Surrender now, and you may yet receive mercy. Zaren stepped forward, her posture straight and defiant. I've seen your mercy, she said coldly. And I'm not interested. The enforcers raised their weapons, but before they could fire, Daniel hit the EMP switch. A pulse of blue energy surged through the room, disabling their armor and weapons in an instant. Now! Daniel shouted. Zarin moved like lightning, her enhanced speed and strength fully unleashed by her newly freed implants. She disarmed the first enforcer with a single precise strike, then used his own weapon to disable 2 more. Daniel fired his plasma rifle at the remaining enforcers, his shots carefully aimed to incapacitate rather than kill. His heart pounded, but he kept his focus, trusting Zarin to cover his blind spots. Within minutes, the squad was neutralized, their armor sparking and their weapons scattered. But the sound of more ships approaching reminded them that this was only the beginning. "We can't hold this position," Daniel said, his voice strained. "They'll just keep sending reinforcements." Zarin grabbed a communicator from one of the fallen enforcers and keyed in a frequency. "We're not staying. We're sending a message." Daniel frowned. "What kind of message?" "The kind that gives others hope," Zarin replied, her voice firm. She activated the communicator, and her voice rang out across the Imperial channels. "This is Zarin, former lieutenant of the Empire. I am free. The Empire's control can be broken. If you hear this, know that you are not alone. Stand with me, and we will take back our freedom." Daniel watched as the message broadcast, his chest tightening with a mix of fear and pride. "You really think anyone will listen?" Zarin turned to him, her expression resolute. "They don't need to listen. They just need to believe." The communicator crackled as a faint reply came through, a voice hesitant but determined. "We hear you, Zarin. We're with you." Another voice followed, then another, until the airwaves were filled with the sound of dissent, of courage. Daniel stared at Zarin in awe. "You just started a revolution." Zarin smiled, the weight of years of silence and pain lifting from her shoulders. "No," she said. "We just started it." The sound of approaching ships grew louder, but this time it wasn't just the Empire. Other voices, other ships joined the fray, allies answering Zarin's call. Daniel and Zarin stepped out of the workshop, their heads held high, as the sky lit up with the promise of change.